This Bible belongs to the group of copies that have the date 1611 and the phrase "appointed to be read in churches" on both title pages, and the reading, "And he went into the city" in Ruth 3:15. It is considered the first edition of the King James Bible. For the title page of the New Testament, Robert Barker reused the large woodcut border that had embellished his 1602 edition of the Bishop's Bible, which is stop number 13. There are no illustrations in the Bible except for those in the genealogies, but there are many headpieces, vignettes, and ornamental initials. As a rule, larger initials are used at the beginning of a book and smaller ones at the beginning of a chapter, but there is no absolute consistency. Initials representing Daphne being transformed into a laurel or Pan playing his pipe may have been borrowed from a book on mythology. The large initial at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, shown here, has the same origin. It includes a depiction of an image of Neptune driving his chariot. Reusing initials was common practice at the time.
Many folio Bibles bearing Barker's imprint and the date 1611 survive. Unlike editions of the text printed in 2011, they are not identical. Each of them has both a general title page and a secondary title page before the New Testament, but the information printed on these pages varies slightly from one group of copies to the other. In some copies, minor textual variations occur throughout the biblical text. One example is quoted time and again, the rendering of verse 3:15 in the book of Ruth. Some copies read, "And he went into the city." Others read, "And she went into the city." The best Hebrew manuscripts have the masculine form of the verb. The Latin Vulgate has the feminine, and the context seems to require a feminine pronoun in English. This is the second folio edition of the King James text, commonly known as the Great She Bible, after its reading in Ruth 3:15, "And she went into the city." This edition has the general title page engraved by Burr, shown here, and the 1602 border in the New Testament title page. In Matthew 26:36, the correct reading of the He Bible, "Then cometh Jesus," was replaced with the erroneous "Then cometh Judas." It appears that most sheets of the She Bible, if not all of them, were printed in 1611, but the edition was not released until 1613. The first edition of the King James text, published in 1611, embodied the prototype of a Bible appointed to be read in churches. For private use, more portable and cheaper Bibles were printed within a year. In 1612, Barker produced both a quarto and an octavo edition of the King James text. Both are close reprints of the 1611 first edition, but look strikingly different. Not only are they smaller and easier to handle, they are also printed in a different typeface. While the folio was printed in the traditional black letter, the pages of the two 1612 Bibles look much lighter and modern because they are printed in Roman type. The 1611 folio used Roman type to create a strong visual difference between the biblical text and any editorial additions, such as chapter summaries, marginal notes, and words supplied by the translators but not found in the Hebrew and Greek originals. To preserve this contrast, the 1612 quarto replaced the Roman type of the first edition with italics. The practice was adopted in all the early editions of the King James Bible printed in Roman type, and is still used in contemporary scholarly editions. In this octavo edition, a funny misprint appears in Psalm 119 at verse 161, where some copies read, "Printers have persecuted me without cause," instead of "Princes have persecuted me." The error was caught and corrected while the sheet was being printed. The copy shown here has the correct reading. The edition is displayed closed to show its vellum binding dated 1640 and stamped with the initials and shield of Johann Wilhelm Kress von Kressenstein. Fragments of the green silk tie that once kept the volume closed are still attached to its cover. Toward the middle of the 17th century, Kress had quite a reputation as a connoisseur, and his bookplates are found on books and manuscripts scattered throughout many European libraries. Engraved portraits of 4 other members of the Kress family are found in front of the Bible. This Bible has retained its 17th century binding of tooled leather over oak boards, and, most notably, the chain that used to fasten it to a lectern or desk. Paradoxically, chaining books was a means of providing free access to them. At a time when books were so expensive that their loss had to be prevented at all costs, chaining offered the only alternative to locking them away. Books were chained in monastic libraries since time immemorial, and in universities at least since the 13th century. Starting with Henry VIII in 1541, several English monarchs ordered each parish church in their realm to display a copy of the Bible so that each person could have access to God's Word. The churches responded by chaining the Bibles to pillars or lecterns. Their records show how much they had spent for the Bible and how much for the chain. As books became less expensive and more evenly spread throughout society, the practice of chaining them in public places was gradually abandoned. The Bibles published by Robert Barker and his associates were essentially reprints of the 1611 text, with occasional corrections of existing misprints and inadvertent additions of new typographical errors. In 1629, the University of Cambridge published the first revised edition of the translator's work. A group of Cambridge dons read it against the Hebrew and Greek originals and proceeded to make it more literal and more scholarly. The changes they made may not have any significant impact on the meaning of the English version, but they certainly raised its level of accuracy. The revisers replaced singular with plurals and plurals with singulars, and substituted possessive pronouns for definite articles in order to bring the translation closer to the original text. According to a pamphlet published in 1641, the first 1629 Cambridge Bible sold for 10 shillings unbound. B.J. Macmullen examined 39 copies of the 1629 edition and determined that they were printed on 7 different qualities of paper. We may assume that the prices varied with the paper. At Cambridge, the process of revising the King James Bible did not stop with the publication of the 1629 folio. A second revised edition was issued in 1638 and remained the standard text of the King James Bible until 1762. It was the work of 4 scholars, 2 of whom had been members of the original team of translators. The 1638 edition completed and corrected the work done 1 decade earlier and brought increased accuracy and consistency to the King James Bible. It contributed to the standard text 121 readings, and 114 spellings of proper names. The two printers, Thomas Buck and Roger Daniel, were so proud of their work that they promised a free copy of the 1638 folio to any person who could discover an error. In the late 19th century, 5 misprints were found, including the one in Acts 6:3, where the incorrect reading, "whom ye may appoint," had replaced the traditional reading, "whom we may appoint." The error suggests that the apostles wanted the faithful to appoint their own deacons. The third complete Bible printed in Scotland was the octavo edition of the King James text issued in Edinburgh in 1633, probably to celebrate the coronation of Charles I in Edinburgh in the month of June. The Bible was produced by Robert Young. A set of 76 plates, based on engravings made by a Flemish artist, was added to the text of the New Testament in many copies of the 1633 Bible, but not in the one on display. The illustrated Bibles outraged the Scottish Protestants, who perceived the engravings as evidence of idolatry and found particularly offensive a depiction of the Assumption of the Virgin inserted before the title page of the New Testament. In the copy shown here, the biblical text is preceded by an edition of the Book of Common Prayer of the Church of England, printed by Robert Young in 1634. 3 years later, when Charles I tried to replace the Scottish prayer book with the Anglican one in the liturgy, there was a riot in the principal church in Edinburgh, and the congregation threw their clasped Bibles and the very stools they sat on at the minister's head. Robert Young returned to London in 1638, but was reappointed King's Printer for Scotland 3 years later.